Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly tech agnostic live stream about digital transformation. This is my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, the CEO of a tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, and that is Third Stage Consulting. Today's topic is modern ERP for manufacturers, what you need to know. So we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff related to ERP specific to manufacturing, types of organizations, and we're going to get into some of the trends in the space as well as the rise of platforms in the ERP space. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that. We've got the perfect guest to talk about that topic here today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before I do, just a couple of quick logistical items. First of all, I mentioned that this is a weekly live stream. We do it every Tuesday, same time, same place. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and TikTok. So thanks for being here today, wherever you're listening, and we'll get to any questions you have along the way. So please use the chat function, drop in comments, questions, anything you want to talk about. We're keeping an eye on the stream here today across all the platforms. And then lastly, speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat where in the world you're joining from today. What city and country are you in here today? Love to hear where this global community is joining from today. We typically draw people from all over the world, so it's always fun to see where everyone's joining. So city and country, if you don't mind dropping that in the chat. I myself is joining from Denver, Colorado. I'll let my guest tell us here in a minute where he's joining from. And speaking of our guest today to talk about modern ERP for manufacturers is Raj from a company called Rootstock. So Raj, thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself to get started. Tell us about yourself and tell us about Rootstock, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you asked the first question where we're joining from. I'm joining from the Bay Area in California, where it's a cold 48 degrees Celsius. And for those of the guys joining from the West Coast, Eric didn't tell you this, but we can see you too. And I know you're in your jammies. No, we're kidding. Of course not. We can't see you. I work for a company called Rootstock Software, Eric, as you mentioned. Rootstock is the natively built ERP on the Salesforce platform. We've been in business about 15 years. We're super excited about the potential of what the platforms can actually do, especially as it relates to Salesforce. And especially for Rootstock, I'm the Chief Product and Marketing Officer, which means I get this unique position of selling what we build and building what we sell, and bringing those two things together. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. This is the first time we've had a chance to sit down and do an interview like this. I guess I'm going to ask you in a second here to tell us a little bit about Rootstock, but maybe even before I ask you that, can you tell us, you just mentioned the word platform, you mentioned Salesforce, you mentioned Rootstock. Tell us just basic 101, what is a platform? Like how is that different than a traditional ERP system?
Well, so that's a great question, right? So when you think about what makes a platform versus what makes a traditional, ERP application, the big difference is a platform tends to be extensible right from the grounds up, meaning it's almost like a bunch of building blocks that you can assemble together to create exactly what you need, as opposed to, having a pre-built sort of building or apartment that you walk into where everything is configured and set up for you. And there's a lot of customization that needs to happen to tailor it to what you need. So a platform gives the flexibility to mix and match pieces as you need there, right? So if you think about the Salesforce platform in particular, it is a modern, cutting-edge cloud platform. That's just there, right? And then when you build on top of that, you get all the benefits about the $5-6 billion of R&D spending that Salesforce has done. So I'm talking about everything to do with componentization. I'm talking everything to do with integration with business process flows, which makes it configurable. It's all the data and AI now that's coming in. All of that become available. And then there's this beautiful thing called the App Exchange, where there's hundreds and thousands of providers. So the mix and match to do exactly what you need versus a monolithic stack that's been created, like 40 years ago, 50 years ago in traditional ERPs, that's the big difference here, Eric.
Right. So Rootstock has essentially taken what most people think of when they think of Salesforce, they think of CRM. I mean, when I think Salesforce, I think CRM. I don't necessarily think manufacturing. Those are two, to me, those are two very different things. But what Rootstock has done then is take the Salesforce platform and extend it and add manufacturing capabilities. Is that a fair?
You got it. It's absolutely fair. And in fact, it's interesting to me that there are so few people who actually are even aware that there's an ERP on the Salesforce platform, right? And this is exactly why it's like CRM is synonymous with Salesforce right now, because they really dominate that market. At the same time, if you remember, one of the first things that the genius of Mark Benioff was deciding to really not build another vertical on top of Salesforce like ERP, but really go horizontal with the platform story that enabled, I don't know how many thousands of software companies that got constructed on the Salesforce platform. We are one of the largest managed packages on the Salesforce platform, Eric. That's the other big difference to remember, is ERP is not a small extension. It is a major complement. In fact, that's what runs the business. And when you put together ERP and CRM together on the same cloud platform, there's an incredible amount of synergy for a manufacturer, right? Because you get demand, you get supply, you get capacity all in one platform. And that's the notion of what we call the signal chain, right? Which I'm going to talk about in a second as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. So, so you talked a little bit about what you do at Rootstock. You talked a little bit about what Rootstock is and how it's an extension of the Salesforce cloud platform. What else makes the Rootstock platform unique in the ERP space?
So let's talk about when was the last ERP built, right? I think it most likely was built in the last century. And Eric, I'd like to equate this to cars that were designed in the 1900s versus cars that gets designed now. And it's the Tesla versus the traditional automaker kind of analogy, right? When you look at traditional automakers, they have a certain set of constraints. There was technology constraints. Things were not as modular as before. Cloud was literally not there in the last century. What if you could think about how you reimagine ERP in the 21st century, right? What choices would you make? How would you do this differently? How do you approach the design point and so on and so forth? So for us, that's where the big, sort of challenger to the big ERP comes in, right? When I look at the big ERPs that's been around for a long time, well, guess what? You are the victim of the choices you made when you started this whole thing, and everything is incrementalism from that point on. Versus what we were able to do is to say, okay, let's look at what a modern ERP needs. How do we make it modular? How do we make this in a way that does away with customizations altogether, which is really the bane of why ERP implementations fail. And you know this, right? I mean, you talk about ERP failures, quite a bit, and you're the expert at this more than me. What I do know is two things, right? Rootstock is defined and designed from the grounds up to be different from the traditional ERPs by being modular. We want to make sure that our customers kind of sense that, and they can do implementations really quickly and very flexibly, because you want to use business processes first versus code first, right? And that's the big change that we ended up doing. And now there's another thing that's come up right now, Eric, which is, shockingly, the world of AI, right? AI needs all of data to be clean, integrated, all in one place. And guess what? When you have CRM and ERP in the same sort of instance, it automatically lends ourselves to creating the best of the AI models to be contextually relevant and so on with a user. Those are all the things that Rootstock is doing, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And yet it's all in the cloud too. That's a big part of it, of AI adoption too, or AI leveraging the power of AI. Having it all in the cloud is super powerful.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So what trends are you seeing in cloud ERP adoption? Speaking of that, speaking of cloud, what trends are you seeing in terms of cloud adoption, particularly in manufacturing and supply chain intensive industries?
Yep. Manufacturing is one of the most conservative industries that are out there. Just historically speaking, I worked across multiple verticals before as well. Manufacturers marry for life. They're not your Tinder users, okay? They're not, they're not flipping every 3 months to see, oh, is there a new ERP out there that I could implement? No, this thing is like a heart surgery, right?
Right.
Hopefully you get it once in your life and you never want to touch it again. So this is what we found, Eric, here is manufacturing is very thoughtful and considerate about which ERP that they want to go and implement and select. But once it's selected, they typically tend to hold it for at least for a decade. I mean, we have customers, who are switching to Rootstock after 2 decades. I mean, the joke is, the first time they picked the ERP, they were unmarried, and now their son is going to college, right? I mean, it does take them that long before they make the change. Now, we do a survey of manufacturers. We do it twice in a year. The first survey is called manufacturing technology selection. That happens at the beginning of the year. And towards the end of the year, we do AI in manufacturing. It's just to separate the focus on that. And what we found, Eric, was 51% of manufacturers are planning to increase their spend on enterprise software, which includes obviously ERP. Why? Because you want to be more digitally connected, you want to be resilient, you want to be much more competitive. The green screens are kind of not working right now. Look at the volatility in the market today, right? With tariffs being the latest of it, and we went through the pandemic. Uh, it's very hard to do the same agility if you have a 20-year-old system. It just doesn't work. I mean, there's jokes where the person who customized your ERP literally died, right? There's no one else in the company who actually knows how to use the system. So
Right.
they won't change until they're pushed to it. But there is a very conservative view, but it's coming. The wave is coming of the change, which is one thing we're seeing. The last stat that I thought was super interesting is 82% of manufacturers, they are planning to invest in AI. That's a ridiculously high number, right? I mean, AI is truly one of those incremental budget items that may not have been what you started with, but that is something that they're considering what to do. Now, it's another thing that vendors, and I include us in that, right? We end up hyping this whole thing, and we create this scenario where we redefine existing technologies and automation into AI, which is a little unfair. But nevertheless, there is clearly an interest in manufacturing AI.
Yeah. Yeah. So even despite their conservatism or their, match or their investments for life and their tendency to focus on one platform, they're still moving towards
It
cloud.
is, right. I mean, look at the most transformational technology of our lifetimes right now, Eric. This is what we're seeing right now. It's hard for you to not be impressed when you go to something like ChatGPT and you say, "Write me a song for third stage consulting," and it writes it for you. And then you say, "Write me a song for third stage consulting in the style of Snoop Dogg," and it does that too. So,
Yeah.
and this is the consumer use case. I'm not saying this is the enterprise use case, but it's hard for someone to not want to implement something like that in ERP as well. It's hard for someone to not demand more of unstructured data, leveraging voice-based conversations, and so on, and really translate that into a structured sort of format, and so on and so forth.
Right. Now, playing devil's advocate here, we've got a comment here on YouTube. It says AI is BS. So I'm
Oh,
not sure. I'm not sure. Not sure what that person means by that, but I'd love to hear an elaboration on why you
well,
think.
tell me how you really feel. Um,
Exactly. Well, you and I were talking though. In all seriousness, you and I were talking before we went live here today about how there is a dark side to AI. AI
yeah,
is all. There's a lot of opportunity. We're all excited about it, except for this person on YouTube. Apparently, is not excited.
exactly right.
But there's a
It
dark
can
side.
it can be, Eric. Like, is the funny part is you said it correctly. Look, it depends on the use cases, right? If you try to implement AI into the wrong set of use cases, most of AI impact can be into two buckets, right? There's deterministic and there's probabilistic. Deterministic is when you want exact results. This is what ERPs have been known for, right? You don't want your books to be, hallucinating, right? I want my balance sheet to actually tally. I don't want my balance sheet to be hallucinated by an AI. So clearly, that's not a great use case where you want deterministic answers. But probabilistic is where I would like to get a sense of where this could be. This could be in demand planning and forecasting kind of scenarios. This could be, I want to get a better estimate of lead time optimization from my suppliers. I want to know when raw materials are due. So there's so many unknowns. There's weather. There's like the Suez Canal thing that somebody didn't know how to drive the ship and got wedged in sideways. There's all these kinds of things that ends up happening, right? Now, we got to pick what the right use case is. And to our sort of conversation earlier, people are using AI for cheating, right? So students are using AI. And this is the interesting educational sort of the segue a little bit here. Can you trust homework anymore, right? Because kids are using AI for writing their essays and everything like that. So why is that real? Versus in the enterprise context, right? Are you going to redefine automation as AI? Are you just going to say, hey, I have a flow that actually automates a few steps? Does that become AI for you? No, it's not. So AI's BS is if you are not clear about what you want to do with it. Of course, if you are familiar with the technology and you look at the application and you look at the labeling, so even as vendors, like, for us, like as ISV partners, we need to be responsible in terms of what we want customers to actually do with it. If we hype this too much and we bring things that are not real, well, our customers are very smart. They look at it and go, that is BS, because you're trying to tell me something that I always did. And we just want to be cautious about that.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And just like any technological decision, there's trade-offs, there's risks, and we'll actually get to some of those trade-offs, pros and cons of platform versus more traditional ERP systems here in a moment. But first, I want to just reach out or look to the audience here. Some comments. Darian, thank you for joining on LinkedIn. She says, good morning. Rihan from Pakistan says, good evening to all from Pakistan. Thank you for joining here this evening. And then Pedro joining from Mexico says, good morning from Mexico. So thank you for being here, all of you. Here is a question that I want to pull up. I thought it was a really good question here. It was from Rihan. Where did it go? Oh, actually it's from Muhammad on YouTube. So Muhammad on YouTube says, please, can you also say about or talk about the future of ERP development? And I guess I want to broaden that a little bit because it's a great point and it's something to think about. I think a lot of times you talked about in your introduction and your explanation of the difference between ERP platforms versus sort of the monolithic ERP model.
Yep.
One of the advantages of the platform model is more flexibility and that sort of thing. But how do you see that? How do you see that evolving in the future? Because a lot of people think development, customization, it's a bad word. You shouldn't do it. There's a school of thought that says you should go with a monolithic ERP system, out of the box, vanilla, best practices, all that stuff. So how do you see this, not this conflict, but this alternative to the monolithic ERP systems? How do you see that developing or evolving in the future?
It's a great question and something that we have debated internally on what it actually means. So let's go back to Eric to why did we evolve into this best practices kind of situation, right? There's two explanations for this. We can say, well, let's take the Jeffrey Moore core versus context, focus on your core and don't try and sort of extend your ERP to the context, because most businesses, whether you like it or not, are pretty plain vanilla. They have similar ways of order to cash, similar ways of procure to pay, similar ways of plan to produce, right? Which is all the processes that you need in an ERP. Or it could very well be that I built a monolithic system that actually is getting a lot of bad press, because when people try to extend it to our users, this thing breaks and it creates heavy negative feedback. So I'm going to work the PR system to focus and convince everybody that plain vanilla is only the best way to go for you, right? I mean, this are two interpretations of this. Now, what we found is the middle ground is the right answer. The middle ground is we will give you the base platform that does most of your functionality for you. But what monoliths have to do with big ERPs, with customization, you can actually modularize this and you can extend that with everything that you need. Like, for example, let's say, you're not, you're a system, you're an engineer to order sort of manufacturer, and you need product lifecycle management to work with ERP. Guess what? You drop a PLM system that works with ERP and you're great with that. Or you are a regulated industry, a medical device manufacturer, and what you need more than anything else is for FDA approvals, and you want to do compliance tracking and so on. Guess what? Along with ERP, you can drop a module for compliance tracking. An ETO manufacturer is very different from a med device manufacturer. So the choice that you had before was, I have one monolithic ERP that I have to customize in one direction or the other, and the base of, hey, just use plain vanilla is not going to be enough. So that's where we see the difference today. But going forward, Eric, which is the future of, I mean, it's very clear the future of AI is going to be, future of ERP is going to be AI. There's no way around it, because look, I think anecdotally, I don't have the source where I saw this. 67% of enterprise data is stored in AI today, and if you stored in enterprise ERP today, if you want an AI model to get built on top of it, you need ERP, which has the lion's share of data to feed your AI models to make it much more specific to that. Why would you not consider having a clean, modern AI system that actually helps you build all of these things? So to me, the actionability, the decision making, in context sort of processing is what we need with the future of ERP, which is going to be very different from the way we are interacting with ERP till date. I think there's going to be a significant departure.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and that's exciting to think about too. Also want to say hello to David on YouTube joining from Malta. I've always wanted to go to Malta. I've never been. Have you been
Malta
there, Raj?
sounds nice. I think
does,
it's
especially
zero tax too, by the way, if I remember.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah,
So
David, I
lots of
hope
reasons.
you're spending all the money you're saving with your taxes. I'm sure you're having fun in Malta.
And hopefully the weather's great too, better than what you're experiencing in San Francisco today.
It's only California.
And then I'm going to try to pronounce this name from Ukraine, Okaha, I believe it is. And I apologize if I butchered that name. Joining from Ukraine, textile production, Edelvika in Ukraine. So thank you for joining today. And here's a comment from Shankarshan on YouTube. I've seen your channel grow so much in the past 5 years. Bravo. Well, thanks for watching for 5 years. You're one of the original fans. If you've been watching that long and you've seen it grow in 5 years. Here's a question from, where is it? Edward. It's sort of building on something you just mentioned a moment ago. Let me change this so it doesn't cover your face there, Raj. There we go. Okay, so Edward says, good question on the ERP for AI development. What needs to happen in ERP development to prepare for AI? You started to talk a little bit about this a moment ago when you were talking about getting clean data, getting it all in one place, ideally in the cloud. What else do we need to do as we think about, if we're a manufacturer and we're thinking about AI, what else do we need to do in the ERP space to get ready for AI?
I think we should talk about it from a slightly the other end of it, because I'm a product guy, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that needs to happen for AI to work, but really, what does it look like when it's finished, right? So let's paint that picture first, right? So to me, AI has three significant characteristics that's got to be, especially for ERP. Number one, it's got to be touchless. What do I mean by that? Think about the entire paradigm of how we interact with ERP all these years, right? There's screens, there's clicks, and there's all these things that you have to get through to actually get to the job that you need to do. Most of training is UI navigation. I mean, when we finally have an AI that you can talk to, that understands you perfectly, is that training still valid anymore? I don't know. Right? It's like, why are we insisting on touch as the only paradigm of interacting with AI? Right? I think about AI as a super intelligent being that's sitting in the middle, that has access to all of your demand, all of your capacity, all of your supply. When we do MRP runs, right? All these exceptions that come in. Well, guess what? Your ERP knows it all. But you have siloed that to make it about users and modules and per seat pricing and all the nonsense that's come in along the way. So you've really thrown away the value of what ERP can be, right? So touchless is super, super important. Second is atomic. So this goes to talk to the modularity of all of it. Not everyone needs all information. Okay, that's a reality. If you're an employee working in purchasing, you don't really care about what's happening, outside of that department. You certainly don't care about what's happening in the shop floor. That's fine, but in the context of purchasing, there is a level of intelligence that needs to happen as well. The third is agentic, right? We talked about agents and agentic architectures and so on and so forth. What does that mean? It means that, look, if there is a way for an agent to do the task a human could do, an agent will do it. And you have to start with that particular philosophy right from the grounds up to say, what can agents do that's better? For example, I'll give you a perfect example that we can talk about: cleanliness of data. Why does a human being need to clean the data? Why can't an agent do it? There's
Hmm.
enough heuristics to actually consistently go look at, hey, you know what, this thing doesn't look right. I'm going to go fix it by what I think. I have a customer record that doesn't have a zip code, for example, right? All of these things are a self-reinforcing loop because the data cleanliness, as you know, is going to become super important. And the biggest thing, Eric, which is kind of like a blew my mind when I thought about it, we spent 40 to 50 years in building ERP and putting data in little text boxes, right? Whatever that is, right? Whether it's like, how much quantity and UOM, and, we had all of those things that we actually put in. But today we're saying the biggest value of data is actually in the text fields, it's in the descriptions, because that's where the value has shifted right now. And all current ERPs are still stuck in that old paradigm where they're like, oh, you got to type it in like one field at a time. No, I don't want to type it in. I want to use this. I want to use my phone. I want to talk to it. I want ERP to figure out everything, what fields it goes into, and I want it to tell me what I need to do next. I do not want to waste my time. That's the future, right? That's what AI is going to do for ERP going forward.
Right. Yeah, that's exciting. It's exciting to think about that. And here's a really great question. We could honestly spend the entire conversation talking about this one question, but I'm gonna pull it up anyway. I'm gonna hide, make sure I can show most of the question here. This is from Pedro on LinkedIn. Pedro says, I believe one of the main challenges with ERP systems is ensuring they reach all levels of the organization, from sensors and machines to systems and platforms.
Yep.
Often companies invest in an ERP but fail to connect it to the full automation ecosystem, also known as level 0. The
Yep.
problem lies in how closed off most ERPs tend to be when it comes to integrating with other systems. Without full connectivity, the ERP's potential value remains limited. So what are your thoughts there? And we're kind of getting into a whole nother topic here with sensors and IoT,
And IoT.
Industry 4.0, 5.0, tying this all together, all the shop floor information. How do platforms help that potentially?
Exactly. No, I think you said it exactly right. Look, here's the thing. It depends on the manufacturer, or in this case, the customer themselves that we're talking to. Enterprises tend to love IoT because IoT tends to be a way for them to save on personnel costs. You don't need to have as many field service techs anymore for repair. The machine can self-diagnose, send out signals, and there's a lot of value within that. There's particular industries like utilities, etc., that actually tend to love these kinds of signal-based things. When was the last time you had somebody from your favorite power utility company come home to read your meter, right? We've gotten past that. So that's something that's happened in our practical day-to-day lives. It is also not correct to say that every manufacturer at every size needs this. And look, Rootstock in particular, we deal with mid-market manufacturers where IoT is interesting, but for them, they have typically a smaller set of operations where the complexity isn't that high. At the same time, the value of IoT is in customer focused asset management. What I mean by that is, more than automating their own factory floors, right? Which of course you need some level of that. What if there's a phone home, dial home capability of every machinery, every asset I've installed at a customer, and use that as a revenue event, right? Something is breaking, something is about to run out. We have a customer at Rootstock who basically sells to the food service industry. So think about the last time you went to Taco Bell. You look like a Taco Bell guy, Eric. Are you?
No, I'm not.
No, you're not.
I haven't eaten there in like 20 years, but
Okay, so Taco Bell, just for the record, right, in the back office, they have a massive cooker, right? It cooks like a ton of meat at the same time, right? It's an industrial size cooker. So we have a customer that manufactures these kinds of things, and what they have inside the machine is a spatula, that keeps turning it around to make sure that things are cooked evenly and so on. The
yeah.
spatula wears out.
Hmm.
Okay. And imagine if the spatula wore out at the middle of a busy day, and it could take days, to actually replace it and so on and so forth. That's loss of revenue. And IoT at that point has got to basically identify that, the effectiveness of the spatula is coming down. And, why can't we proactively send someone to actually go in and replace it? So this is a good example of how the level zero, the whole IoT layer and the signal layer comes together with ERP. It gets the idea that something is going wrong. It ends up, catching the part, doing the technician dispatch, right, and recognize it in this book. So there's an upsell that gets locked as well. So there's all these things can come in, but it's for the right use case and for the right size company, is what I'd say.
Right. Yeah. Lots of opportunity. You just got to right size it and make sure it fits, what you need and what you're looking for. Here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how big of a challenge do you see in cleaning, structuring, and labeling that ERP data for AI use? Is this where IT teams are getting stuck, or is it more of a cultural and organizational issue?
It's an interesting question that, yes, cleaning and labeling ERP data is important, especially in the context of AI. Uh, really, if you were to sort of go back a little, Darian, the question is, why are we in this mess? Like, why is it that the case is like this, right? Typically, what ends up happening is, you know, ERP tends to be not a fun tool to use. In
Right.
other words, it's something you must do, because otherwise the job doesn't get done, right? You must do. So there's a lot of data that sometimes are due to poor implementations. There's mandatory fields that don't use, business needs change. You don't want to go back and change all of that stuff. When was the last time that the tool that you're using, you said, let me do a comprehensive audit and hide all the fields that I don't use anymore? You don't do that. You let that be. And poor users, they're like, God dang it, I can't go to the next screen unless I type in some junk. So ASDF, this is what you see in many of those fields. That's what's fine because you used ERP as a transactional entity. But all of a sudden, you want to use it as a system of intelligence because you're sticking AI on top of it and you're feeding it junk data. So there's got to be this massive cleanup that you have to do before you can actually get to a point of intelligence, because it's this, believe it or not, AI is garbage in, garbage out, just like any other computer software system that we've seen in the last 50 years. So it is cultural in one sense, to your point. Are we responsive as leaders to our people to make sure that we're giving them the most cutting edge technology and the most interesting things? Or are we going to be making a selection in a centralized way, dumping it and saying it's on you? And the only time I'm realizing it is, shucks, I need like an AI strategy and I need to go back and fix the data now. So it's a little bit of both, is what I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you there. Here's a comment from Patrick, a follow up to that. Patrick on LinkedIn says, in the age of automation and AI, technology debt for manufacturers that don't think to change old systems will grow rapidly in the next few years.
Absolutely. And Patrick, Eric and I just spoke about that a while ago, that there are systems where the original developer has passed away, that there's no other information that's currently in the system to actually go back and change these things. And this is how conservative our industry is in manufacturing. And you almost need to start to think about the next 10 to 15 years. Just take a look at what's happening in the market today, right? Do we know what the impact of tariffs is going to be? No, we don't. I mean, it's like it's a sound like CNN. We need to have a running ticker that says, here's what we're charging for each of the countries.
Right.
But what does it mean to ERP? An ERP was never built, Eric, to assume that input costs are variable. Or even if they were variable, it was not in the frequency that it's happening right now, because it's creating havoc, right, into planners, right? Like, how do you plan for a business where you have no idea what the input costs are? And the supply chains are so globalized right now that it's impossible for you to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to certify that this thing does not have a China footprint. You don't know, right? I mean, this is not, possible just as a human planner. What we need to do is, this is where AI actually comes into play. This is where the the probabilistic nature of what we think, do we think that this could have a China impact? Do we think this could be treated a little separately? Those are the things that manufacturers need. Again, going back to use cases, have real use cases that drive AI adoption. Not start with AI because you like ChatGPT and then you're trying to make it work in your enterprise. That's not going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. And by the way, Patrick, the person that asked that question, he's part of an organization that's hosting a digital transformation conference in Poland in November. And the only reason I know that is because I'm speaking at it. So
Oh,
if,
nice.
if you're in anyone here from Eastern Europe or wants to be in Eastern Europe, in November, there's an event all about digital transformation in Poland, and you can ping Patrick if you see him on LinkedIn, or if you're on LinkedIn, you can find him there and follow him, or you can ping me and I can send you info on that conference if you're interested in that. That's good to see Patrick here. Want to keep going through the comments here. Bear with me one second. Mark is joining us from South Africa. We talked about how Malta sounds great right now. South Africa is my favorite country to visit. So I'm a little envious that Mark is joining us from South Africa. Thanks for being here today.
I haven't been, Eric. I'd love to go to South Africa someday.
It's amazing. I love it. It's been a while since I've been there, but it is a really pretty country, and the people and the food are amazing too. So I guess let me hide this here real quickly so I can go back to my questions here. Whoops, there we go. So what about when we think about flexibility and configurability, and especially for a mid-sized manufacturer, how important is that for a mid-sized manufacturer to have that sort of flexibility and configurability with their ERP technology?
Oh, it is absolutely critical. I think we've had several of our customers, talk to us about, we ask a question, why did you pick Rootstock? Like, why? And my sales team doesn't like that, but I do ask them, saying, tell me why you selected us, so we know what we're good at, and how do we continue to earn your business? How do we continue to invest in what that is? Eric, it comes down to basically saying, how can I get the most amount of productivity with the least amount of employees? So we have a customer of ours, and their IT leader was kind enough to come in and address our company. So they're like a global meat manufacturer. They import, hundreds of millions of pounds of beef into the US, and they have distribution and so on. They are one of the largest performing revenue units in the United States for this conglomerate, but at the same time, they only have 33 employees. Ultimately, what it means is, like, how can a tool or a technology help you get the productivity that you need from the business and make it easy? And you know what? They chose us because we were on the Salesforce platform, because we were modular. They were able to assemble bits and pieces that actually configured that business from an end-to-end perspective and reduce the total cost of ownership by 45% over 3 years. I mean, that's the value that we're talking about, right? Do you want this to be easy to use? Do you want it to be, cost effective? Do you want this to be modular and tailored to your business? And by the way, do you want to stand up and say, I'm running the most efficient business that I can? Guess what? That's what you end up getting. So you don't have an army of folks that you need. You don't need an army of consultants to come in and implement this stuff. I mean, that's what mid-market manufacturers have very little. First of all, they don't have the budgets, but they certainly don't have the inclination, because all of these are kind of recovering, right, from big ERP implementations, because they're like, oh my God, I remember when this SI backed up the bus and 32 kids got off, right, to actually help me implement ERP. So that's not what they want.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not, most organizations don't want that, and they realize it after the fact or as the project's underway.
Exactly right.
So when manufacturers or any sort of organization are evaluating potential platforms, whether it's a Salesforce/Rootstock
Mhm.
platform or any other, what are some of the considerations? Like, what are some of the things they should think about as they're evaluating platforms?
Well, so there's three things that I'll say. Number one is integration. Number two is customization. Number three is user experience. Right? I'll boil it down to three things because there's a lot of others, as you know, functional fit, et cetera, et cetera. But it comes down to these things. Number one, why is integration needed? Remember, every integration is a point of failure. I mean, literally, you can go to this because you have two things, and this is like trade between two countries, right? Anybody can tariff each other, and all of a sudden it's chaotic, right? Same thing with integration. You have APIs. One guy changes the API, the whole thing breaks, and you got to go back and say, what the hell? What happened over here? So every integration is a point of failure. So eliminate those as much as you can. Number two, customization. Every point of customization is a point of failure. You may think it's great that my business cannot live without it, but you write code. Guess what? The guy that was really smart who wrote your code, he's gone. Okay.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're scrambling to like, what the hell do I do now? I need somebody else that can help with this. And the other person is not good enough. He has a band-aid over it. It keeps breaking. You have to compensate with operations and throwing bodies at the problem. That's the usual stuff. So eliminate customizations, make it about business process flows where a business analyst can do the job versus a technical sort of developer, right? Number three
Yeah.
is UX. It keeps coming back to user experience. And this is where my personal belief is AI is going to be super helpful in eliminating the UI. So AI is going to be the new UI, as they were saying, right? So what is user experience? It's the ability to make it easy to use. And I don't want to confuse user experience with specific clicking on things and so on and so forth, right? Yes, that exists, but can you make it easy to use in the sense of using things like AI as a generational bridge between people who are retiring, who have all the knowledge, versus the new Gen Zs that are joining the workforce, right? I mean, Eric, we were talking about earlier. I have a daughter in her 20s, right? If I show her a traditional sort of big ERP to say, "Here, honey, you can go have at it," right? They'll run out of the room screaming, right? They can't imagine working with a tool like that. But that's
Just
the
doesn't make sense.
generation we have to design for.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't, it doesn't even make sense to them. It's like a foreign
Yeah,
language. It just doesn't
yeah.
resonate,
But
and
that's
understandably so.
But that's the 2.1 million workforce jobs in manufacturing that are going unfulfilled. It's like, why is that? Like, what kind of environment are you creating when you take new employees in? You're going to show them to your green screen, really, like 40 years old, and say, go do that? Guess what? These kids don't want to do it, Eric. They're unlike, I think it's a generational thing, right? If you try to show them old technology and say, this is the only way of doing it, and I did it, and your dad did it, and your grandfather did this, and you have to do it, it's not going to work. So there's another change which is driven by demographics, if not just for technology.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think that's a point that often gets overlooked or glossed over or just completely neglected. In that your ERP system and your core tech stack can have an impact on the types of employees you attract and retain. It's not just okay. It's a tool to do our jobs. That's great. It's a tool to run the business, of course, but it's also a way to you look at, are we attracting the right people? Are we attracting younger people and people that we can groom and develop, or are we just going to attract the same people that have been using the same outdated systems for 30 or 40 years or more?
And that's the choice that I guess we have to make here, right? If you say that the system is unchangeable and immovable and the people need to change, I think you're 20 years too late for that argument.
Yeah.
Right, that's the expectation shift that's happened with our workforces. Is workforces today are incredibly smart. I mean, they can multitask. And I like to think I have ADHD, right? Undiagnosed, right? But man, I got nothing on these kids who can have like 18 different applications they use at the same time. And there's awesome productivity and things over here, but you need to create an environment even within an ERP to make it easy for them to use. And it's not screens and training and all that wonderful stuff. I think the patience to tolerate, BS systems, like the guy mentioned so eloquently earlier,
Right.
I think it's very, very, very low.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just to sort of validate the point you were making earlier, that there is a school of thought that there's still a school of thought out there that says you shouldn't customize, you should leave the software as it is, use it out of the box, best practices, pre-configurations, all that stuff. Here's a comment from Perry as you were just giving that response. This was from Perry on LinkedIn. It says no customizations. And then the follow-up to that is, I think he was commenting on what you were just saying a moment ago about, the older generation still running the technology here. But this is the comment here from Perry is that is the reason we have 80-year-olds still maintaining mainframes within government departments.
Hey,
And
this is the opportunity lost for all of us, right? I wish I specialized in System 360 in IBM and I'm like the world's best expert because I have a job for life. This is the thing. You can be 80 years old and you can continue to work on mainframes. It just tells you that there's such a dependency. Technology, once they work, they're hardy things to kind of move off, which is why, even within the world of ERP, it's like you talked about this becoming a heart surgery or brain surgery. You don't want to do it more than once. You tend to do it once and you tend to hang on. But the pace of change at which things are happening right now, all manufacturers must have an IT strategy. This is what our survey is telling us, right? This is not me wishfully thinking this. This is what they're saying. You know what? We put in stuff 2 decades ago. We're looking very, very long in the tooth now. We have to change. It's not an
yeah.
option anymore.
So what are some of the biggest challenges then when an organization is going to migrate from either a monolithic ERP system from 20 years ago, or even worse, a mainframe system from 40 or 50 years ago, moving from that to a cloud-based platform like a Salesforce or Rootstock? That's a big jump, and what are
It
some of
is.
the biggest challenges they face when making that big jump?
So I'll tell you what, it's not software, it's not hardware, it's wetware, it's humans, it's
Mm,
brains, right? It's really change management is the number one thing that ends up happening. Look, we'd love to say all of the flaws is with the technology. And I think Eric, you said this before too. It's like, look, the biggest failures come in because you don't know how to manage change. Human beings, we resist change. I'm comfortable doing what I did. Yes, a shitty system. It's 40 years old, but it works, right? I can make it happen. Now you're telling me I need to change my entire way of how I think, how I do at a human level. At a leadership level, the case for change is very clear. But have you invested in a change management program? Do you have a PMO governance office? Do you understand what the end state is going to look like? Can you anticipate the roadblocks and hurdles? Can you make it easy for your people to, take change into bite-sized sort of pieces, if you will, to go through that? I'm telling you, that's the number one thing that we end up seeing is it's not that the technology is fantastic, but how are you going to continue to fund it? Or are you going to like take your foot off the gas because you made a selection and you're going to delegate it down? No, as executives, you have to be involved in this thing. You got to see this thing to completion. And most of the failures that end up happening is because either executive, like attention is reset to something else. Somebody takes a foot off the pedal. They don't have a strong governance to keep things there. You don't have a good sense of phasing. I mean, these are all the things that consultants, Third Stage, I know does some of them are wonderful at help. You need a third party to help you keep you on track. It's not just the vendor. So there's a triangle of success here, right? There is the customer. There is a ERP vendor like Rootstock, but there's also as a consultant who makes sure that you're being honest with all of this and it's a neutral set of reflecting. When you have those ingredients, that's when it goes in. It's not anything else. Everything else, whether it's data, process, can be handled. That's not the problem.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And sure, the technology is a lot different. Sure, the back end of how you maintain it, how you change it, all that stuff. Yes, that's different, but it's not. The technology is actually a lot easier to use, but it doesn't make it easier to implement. And the reason it's not easier to implement is because of what you said. It's the people, it's the cultural change. This is a mindset shift for us, and having flexibility that we didn't have before. It sounds great, and it is great in the long run,
Mhm.
but in the short term, that creates turmoil and chaos and
And
confusion.
personal anxiety, right? Like people are
Yeah.
anxious, like, oh my God, do I need this? Do I need to change this? Am I? And but that's what leaders do. You got to step in and say, here's why the promised land is going to be better for you, and here's how we're going to go. And this is going to be shitty, right, for this part of the journey. But stay with us, and it's going to be great at the end of it. So the great leaders, you can point to. I'll flip it another way. We can point to failures and we can find common threads, but I'll tell you what, when you can found successes, I always found there are great leaders behind successful ERP implementations who have the vision for it. And there's a correlation between good leadership and successful ERP that I think is not explored enough, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you need strong leadership. You can't, to your point, you can't just delegate it down the organization and hope for the best and assume it's going to be successful. No matter how good that team is that you're delegating to, it's not going to be successful unless you've got that strong leadership backing you behind it. Here's just a couple more comments, and then I've got a closing question here for you today, Raj. Perry says all boys to men have undiagnosed ADD, so that's good news for you. Good news for me too, because I think I have ADD. So we're not alone. It sounds like. Edward on LinkedIn says agreed. That's why older people that understand AI will be very valuable to the young generation. And then as a follow up, Edward also asks, what tips do you have on guiding a company to test AI in a department within a manufacturer or any other organization?
This is an interesting question, right? You test AI in the area where you have the most amount of value. So first of all, ask yourself, what are you testing? Are you testing probabilistic use cases or deterministic use cases? Meaning, if you need probabilistic use cases, any LLM will do. You want an easy way for your sales guys to send an email to your customers looking at the current install base and what parts they need. Sure, you can use Agentforce, which is being pushed by Salesforce as a core technology. We're investing a lot in that. Or you can go directly to OpenAI and write through the platforms as well, right? Either way, there's ways to implement that. But then if you want deterministic, if you want probabilistic, if you want deterministic, which is much more exacting, then you need to build your own AI models. This is where data quality and all of those things come in. For example, we use Einstein Discovery to create, specific models for lead time optimization. So I want to know for my MRP run, will the supplier deliver the raw materials on time? Each supplier delivers it slightly differently, but can I do a trend analysis that says, I think the supplier is not going to deliver, even though my ERP thinks it's going to come in 2 weeks. The reality is that consistently they've been delivering on, maybe 2 weeks late every single time. So if I can factor that into my MRP runs, then I have a much better way of actually doing it. So again, it depends on the use case, but please, for the organization, start with something easy. For God's sake, don't start with the most complicated use case to say, I'm going to change the heart of MRP to run. It doesn't work, right? Start with something easy, something peripheral, and work your way into the organization with the level of complexity as the muscle actually grows and you get familiar with the technology and results.
Yeah, makes sense. So last question for you, Raj. Just as you look to where your place is in the ERP space and in the way you're developing the product, continuing to evolve the product at Rootstock, what's next for Rootstock? What's next for Rootstock, and how are you positioning the company to stay ahead in this ever-changing ERP, AI platform landscape?
We are looking at Rootstock ERP to not just become a system of record, which is kind of where everybody else is looking at, but become an in-context decisioning platform. What does it mean? It means that we want to think about the 80-20 rule, Eric, which we had 80% of the stuff were things that happened automatically with automation and so on, and 20% were exceptions. Now with AI, we can take the 80% off the 20% and automate that too. That's the next level of the efficiency that we're trying to squeeze for our manufacturers. So how does that happen? It happens in context. It cannot happen outside of the user, right? It has to be where the users are working. It's about agentic. It's about bringing together all these interesting elements to help you, drive that. So that, to me, the decisioning platform, which is touchless, which is agentic and atomic, that's the future of ERP that we're building here at Rootstock.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's exciting to think about, and you're in a really exciting front row seat to see how this is all evolving and staying on the cutting edge of technology. So I really appreciate you being here today and sharing some of those insider views of ERP, manufacturing, platforms, all the stuff we talked about here today. So thank you so much for being here today, Raj.
I appreciate you and your thoughtful questions as ever. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to the audience. Great questions today. Really appreciate it. You'll find this episode of Transformation Ground Control is the podcast that we're filming this for. So we're going to edit this. We'll add some additional content. It'll be released in 2 weeks. It'll be the upcoming episode of Transformation Ground Control. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to learn more about that podcast and to watch more episodes as well. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. And we'll see you next time, same time, same place, to talk about more tech agnostic digital